The Westminster Abbey bells chimed 11 times as morning sunlight streamed through the ancient stained-glass windows. Today marked the annual Commonwealth service, one of the most important events in the royal calendar. Hundreds of distinguished guests filled the Abbey, their voices creating a gentle murmur that echoed off the stone walls. Charles adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time as he stood in the vestry. The weight of his responsibilities felt heavier today, though he couldn't quite explain why. Perhaps it was the significance of the service, or maybe the fact that this was his first Commonwealth service as the reigning monarch. The crown had been his for 18 months now, but moments like these still felt surreal. "Your Majesty, we're ready to proceed," whispered his private secretary, David, appearing beside him with practiced discretion. Charles nodded, taking a deep breath. Through the partially open door, he could see the Abbey filling with dignitaries, Commonwealth representatives, and members of the public who had been fortunate enough to receive invitations. The BBC cameras were positioned strategically throughout the space, ready to broadcast this moment to millions around the world. As the royal family began their procession into the Abbey, Charles walked with measured steps, acknowledging the respectful nods and curtsies from the congregation. Behind him, Camilla moved gracefully in her elegant navy ensemble, a gentle smile playing on her lips as she caught the eyes of familiar faces in the crowd. Kate and William followed, with Kate looking radiant in a deep emerald coat that complemented her auburn hair perfectly. She had always possessed this remarkable ability to appear both regal and approachable, a quality that had endeared her to the public from the moment she joined the family. Her confidence had grown tremendously over the years, and Charles often found himself impressed by how naturally she had taken to royal duties. The service began with traditional hymns that filled the sacred space with powerful harmonies. Charles listened as the Commonwealth Secretary-General spoke about unity, diversity, and the bonds that connected nations across the globe. The words resonated deeply with him, reminding him of his own journey and the relationships he had built throughout his decades of service. As the ceremony progressed, various dignitaries took turns reading passages and delivering addresses. Charles found his mind wandering slightly, thinking about the conversations he would have later with the visiting prime ministers and governors general. These personal connections were what he valued most about his role. During a particularly moving musical interlude performed by a youth choir from across the Commonwealth, Charles glanced around the Abbey. The diversity of faces, cultures, and traditions represented in that space never ceased to amaze him. From the colorful traditional dress of the Pacific Island representatives to the formal military uniforms of the Canadian delegation, the scene was a beautiful tapestry of the modern Commonwealth. Kate caught his eye for a moment and offered a warm, encouraging smile. She had been struggling with some challenging press coverage lately, and Charles knew how difficult it could be to maintain composure under such scrutiny. Her grace under pressure reminded him of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who had handled decades of public attention with similar dignity. As the service neared its conclusion, the moment arrived for the royal family to participate in the ceremonial blessing of the Commonwealth flags. This was always one of Charles's favorite parts of the service, as it felt deeply symbolic of the unity and shared values that bound these diverse nations together. The Archbishop of Canterbury called for the royal family to approach the altar for the flag blessing ceremony. Charles rose from his seat, straightening his uniform jacket. This was a moment he had participated in many times as Prince of Wales, but now, as king, it carried additional weight and meaning. The Abbey fell silent except for the soft rustling of fabric as the congregation stood in respect. Charles began walking toward the altar, his footsteps echoing softly on the ancient stone floor. The weight of history seemed to press down on him as he moved through the same space where monarchs had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. Behind him, he could sense the rest of the family following. The choreography of royal events was always carefully planned, with each person knowing exactly where to stand and what to do. Years of practice had made these movements almost automatic, like a well-rehearsed dance. As Charles reached the designated position near the altar, he turned to his right, expecting to find Camilla beside him as they had practiced. The gesture was natural, instinctive even. His hand extended slightly, reaching for the familiar comfort of his wife's presence beside him during this solemn moment. But something was different. The positioning had somehow shifted during the procession, and instead of Camilla's familiar figure in navy blue, Charles found himself looking directly into Kate's surprised green eyes. His hand, already extended in what should have been a subtle gesture of connection with his wife, was now reaching unmistakably toward his daughter-in-law. The moment stretched like eternity. Kate's eyes widened slightly, a fleeting expression of confusion crossing her face before her royal training kicked in. The hundreds of people in the Abbey seemed to collectively hold their breath. Though Charles wasn't sure if they had actually noticed what had happened, or if his own heightened awareness was making everything seem amplified. William, standing just behind Kate, had clearly seen the gesture. Charles could see a flicker of something pass across his son's face, though years of royal discipline kept his expression carefully neutral. The BBC cameras were rolling, capturing every moment for posterity and immediate broadcast around the world. Charles felt heat rising in his cheeks as he realized his mistake. His hand remained suspended for what felt like minutes, but was probably only a second or two. The silence in the Abbey seemed deafening, broken only by the barely audible whisper of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Kate, displaying the poise that had made her such a valuable member of the royal family, gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head and stepped slightly back, creating space between them. Her movement was so subtle that most observers might have missed it, but Charles understood immediately. She was giving him room to recover from the mistake gracefully. Camilla, who had somehow ended up positioned slightly behind and to Charles's left instead of beside him, stepped forward smoothly. Her years of experience in navigating awkward social situations served her well as she moved into position beside her husband, as if this had been the plan all along. The Archbishop, sensing the moment needed to continue, cleared his throat gently and began the blessing ceremony. His voice filled the Abbey, drawing attention back to the religious significance of the moment and away from the personal drama that had just unfolded. Charles forced himself to focus on the words being spoken, though his mind was racing. How had the positioning gone wrong? Had anyone else noticed his mistake? More importantly, how would this affect the family dynamics that were already sometimes strained by the pressures of public life and media attention? As the blessing continued, Charles remained acutely aware of the positioning of everyone around him. Kate had recovered beautifully, standing with perfect posture and appropriate reverence for the ceremony. William maintained his professional demeanor, though Charles could sense tension in his son's shoulders. Camilla, ever the diplomat, participated in the ceremony as if nothing unusual had happened. The Commonwealth flags were blessed one by one, each representing a nation and millions of people who looked to the royal family as a symbol of continuity and stability. Charles tried to lose himself in the significance of the moment, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in that brief instant when he had reached for Kate instead of Camilla. The remainder of the Commonwealth service passed in a blur of hymns, prayers, and ceremonial moments that Charles performed with practiced precision, though his mind remained clouded by what had happened. Every camera flash seemed brighter, every whispered conversation among the congregation more pointed. He found himself analyzing the faces in the crowd, searching for signs that people had noticed his awkward moment with Kate. As the service concluded and the royal family processed out of Westminster Abbey, Charles maintained his composed exterior. The familiar routine of acknowledging dignitaries and accepting brief words of greeting from Commonwealth representatives provided a welcome distraction. Yet underneath the polished surface, anxiety gnawed at him like an old wound. The car ride back to Buckingham Palace was filled with polite small talk about the service and the various officials they had met. Camilla chatted pleasantly about the beautiful floral arrangements and the impressive turnout, but Charles could detect a slight tension in her voice that others might miss. After 40 years of knowing her, he could read her subtle moods like a favorite book. Kate and William traveled in a separate car, and Charles found himself wondering what conversation might be taking place between them. William had always been protective of his wife, sometimes fiercely so, especially when it came to media attention and public scrutiny. The thought of having inadvertently created a situation that might subject Kate to unwanted speculation made Charles's stomach tighten. Back at the palace, the family gathered in the blue drawing room for tea, a tradition following major royal events. The conversation flowed around topics of Commonwealth development, upcoming engagements, and family matters. Charles noticed that Kate seemed slightly more reserved than usual, though she participated graciously in the discussion about her upcoming visits to Scotland and Wales. "The youth choir was particularly moving today," Camilla remarked, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Their rendition of 'How Lovely Are Thy Dwellings' gave me chills." "The acoustics in the Abbey always enhance such performances," Kate agreed, her voice warm but measured. "I was impressed by how confidently they sang, especially the young girl who had the solo during the second verse." Charles found himself studying Kate as she spoke, looking for any signs of discomfort or awkwardness about what had happened. Her training and natural grace made it difficult to discern her true feelings, but he thought he detected a slight hesitancy in the way she occasionally glanced in his direction. William, meanwhile, seemed more distant than usual. He answered questions when spoken to and contributed appropriately to the conversation, but there was a quality to his responses that suggested his mind was elsewhere. Charles had seen this behavior before in his son when William was processing something significant or troubling. As the afternoon wore on, various family members excused themselves for other commitments. Kate mentioned needing to review briefing materials for her upcoming engagements, and William cited a conference call with his Earthshot prize team. Soon, only Charles and Camilla remained in the drawing room. "Well, that was quite a day," Camilla said quietly, setting down her teacup with deliberate care. She looked directly at Charles, her expression kind but searching. "The service was beautiful, don't you think?" Charles recognized the opening she was providing for him to address what had happened. Camilla had always possessed this remarkable ability to create space for difficult conversations without making them feel confrontational or uncomfortable. "It was indeed beautiful," Charles replied, choosing his words carefully. "Though I felt there were moments when the choreography didn't go quite as planned." Camilla nodded slowly, a gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "These things happen, darling. Even with all the rehearsals and preparation, sometimes we find ourselves in unexpected positions. The important thing is how gracefully everyone handles such moments." "Kate handled it beautifully," Charles said, relief evident in his voice at being able to finally acknowledge what had occurred. Her composure was remarkable. "I hope I didn't create any awkwardness for her." "Kate is stronger than you might think," Camilla reassured him. "She's learned to navigate these situations with considerable skill over the years, and William understands the pressures we all face. Don't worry yourself too much about it." Despite Camilla's reassuring words, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that the incident might have broader implications. In the modern age of social media and instant global communication, even the smallest royal misstep could be magnified into a major story. He thought about the photographers and television cameras that had been present, wondering if any had captured the moment from an angle that would make it obvious to viewers. That evening, As Charles worked in his private study, his private secretary, David, knocked gently on the door. "Your Majesty, I wanted to brief you on the media coverage of today's service," David said, entering with a tablet in hand. "Overall, the coverage has been very positive. The BBC focused primarily on the Commonwealth themes and the international representatives present." Charles looked up from his papers, trying to appear casual. "Any particular focus on the royal family's participation?" David scrolled through various news reports on his device. The usual coverage of the family's attendance, some lovely photos of the Duchess of Cambridge's outfit, positive commentary on the ceremony's significance. Nothing unusual or problematic that I've seen. Charles felt a wave of relief wash over him. Perhaps the moment had been less noticeable than he had feared. "That's good to hear. Please continue monitoring the coverage and let me know if anything changes." "Of course, Your Majesty," David replied, turning to leave. He paused at the door and looked back. "If I may say so, sir, the service was particularly meaningful today. Your presence clearly meant a great deal to the Commonwealth representatives." After David left, Charles returned to his papers, but concentration proved difficult. His mind kept returning to that moment in the Abbey, analyzing it from different angles. What had caused the positioning confusion? Had it been a simple mistake in the processional order, or had he been distracted by something else? He thought about Kate and how she had handled the situation with such grace. Her ability to maintain composure under pressure had always impressed him. But today she had demonstrated a level of diplomatic skill that rivaled seasoned statesmen. She had somehow managed to diffuse an awkward situation without making anyone feel embarrassed or uncomfortable. Charles also reflected on William's reaction. His son had always been protective of his family's privacy and dignity, sometimes to an almost fierce degree. The fact that William had maintained his professional demeanor despite what must have been an uncomfortable moment spoke to his own growth and maturity as a senior member of the royal family. As the evening progressed, Charles found himself thinking about the broader implications of such moments in royal life. Every gesture, every glance, every interaction was subject to scrutiny and interpretation. The weight of representing an institution that millions of people look to for stability and continuity meant that even innocent mistakes could take on significance far beyond their actual importance. Yet there was something about today's incident that felt different from typical royal missteps. It wasn't just about protocol or positioning. There had been something almost human about the moment, a glimpse behind the carefully constructed public personas that the family maintained. Charles picked up his phone and considered calling William to check on him and Kate, but decided against it. Sometimes the best approach was to allow time for reflection and let the natural family dynamics reassert themselves. He trusted that if William had concerns or wanted to discuss the matter, he would reach out. Instead, Charles decided to focus on the positive aspects of the day. The Commonwealth service had been a success, with meaningful participation from representatives across the globe. The themes of unity and cooperation had resonated powerfully in the Abbey's ancient walls. These were the moments and messages that truly mattered. As he prepared for bed later that evening, Charles reflected on the lessons embedded in the day's events. Royal life was full of unexpected moments that tested one's composure and adaptability. The true measure of character lay not in avoiding such moments altogether, but in how gracefully one navigated them when they arose. He thought about his mother, Queen Elizabeth, and how she had handled countless similar situations over her 7 decades on the throne. She had always maintained that the key to royal duty was putting the institution and its values above personal comfort or embarrassment. Today, all 3 of them, Charles, Kate, and William, had done exactly that. 3 days after the Commonwealth service, Charles found himself reviewing briefing notes for an upcoming state visit when his private secretary announced that William had requested a private meeting. The request wasn't unusual, as father and son met regularly to discuss royal duties and family matters, but something in David's tone suggested this conversation might be different from their typical discussions about upcoming engagements and charitable initiatives. William arrived at Charles's study at precisely 4 o'clock, impeccably dressed in a navy suit and carrying himself with the quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. As he entered the room, Charles noticed a slight tension around his son's eyes that spoke to the purpose of this visit. "Thank you for making time, Papa," William said, settling into the leather chair across from Charles's desk. The use of the more informal address suggested this would be a personal conversation rather than a strictly official one. "Of course," Charles replied, setting aside his papers and giving William his full attention. "I always have time for you. How are Catherine and the children?" "They're well, thank you," William answered, though his tone remained somewhat formal. "Catherine has been busy preparing for her visit to Edinburgh next week, and the children are excited about their upcoming school holiday." Charles nodded, sensing that William was working up to the real reason for his visit. The small talk felt more stilted than usual, lacking the easy warmth that typically characterized their private conversations. "Papa, I wanted to discuss what happened at the Commonwealth service," William said finally, his voice carefully measured. "Not to create any difficulty, but because I think it's important that we address it directly." Charles had been expecting this conversation, though he had hoped it might not be necessary. "Of course. I've been thinking about it myself, actually. I hope I didn't cause any discomfort for Catherine." William leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "Catherine handles these situations with remarkable grace, as I'm sure you've noticed. She's learned to navigate the complexities of royal life with considerable skill, but I think what happened touched on some broader issues that we should probably discuss." "Such as?" Charles asked, though he suspected he knew where this conversation was heading. "The positioning confusion that led to the incident wasn't really about protocol," William said carefully. "I think it reflected some of the underlying tensions that we sometimes face as a family, particularly regarding public perception and media scrutiny." Charles appreciated his son's diplomatic approach to what could have been a much more difficult conversation. William had clearly thought through how to address the matter constructively rather than confrontationally. "You're right," Charles admitted. "The incident made me realize how much pressure we all face to maintain perfect composure at every moment. Perhaps that pressure sometimes affects our natural instincts and reactions." William nodded thoughtfully. "Catherine and I have discussed how challenging it can be to balance the personal and public aspects of our roles. Every gesture is analyzed, every interaction scrutinized. Sometimes the weight of that scrutiny can make even simple moments feel complicated." "How is Catherine feeling about what happened?" Charles asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. "She's fine," William assured him. "More than fine, actually. She was impressed by how smoothly everyone handled an awkward situation. But she did mention that it highlighted how carefully we all have to navigate family dynamics in public settings." Charles reflected on this observation. The royal family's personal relationships were constantly under public observation, with every interaction subject to interpretation and speculation. What might be a simple misunderstanding between family members in private could become a source of media fascination when it occurred in public. "I've been thinking about my mother's approach to these situations," Charles said, looking out the window at the palace gardens. "She had this remarkable ability to maintain family unity while managing public expectations. I sometimes wonder if I'm living up to that example." "You are," William said firmly, "but you're also facing challenges that she never had to deal with. Social media, instant global communication, the 24-hour news cycle. These things create pressures that previous generations couldn't have imagined." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. David entered with tea service. providing a natural pause in their discussion. As they waited for him to arrange the china and pour their tea, both men seemed to collect their thoughts. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," William said once they were alone again. "Catherine and I have been thinking about how we might help reduce some of the pressure you've been under since becoming king. We know the transition has been significant, and we want to ensure you have all the support you need." Charles was touched by his son's concern. "That's very thoughtful of you both. I must admit, there are moments when the responsibility feels overwhelming. We'd like to take on additional engagements if that would be helpful," William offered. Catherine particularly mentioned wanting to expand her work with early childhood development, and I think there are opportunities for me to increase my involvement with conservation efforts and mental health initiatives. "I would welcome that support," Charles replied gratefully. "Your mother and you have both shown such dedication to your charitable work. Having you take on more responsibilities would allow me to focus on areas where my experience might be most valuable." They spent the next hour discussing potential redistributions of royal duties and upcoming engagements. The conversation gradually shifted from the formal to the personal as they talked about their shared concerns for the monarchy's future and their hopes for the next generation. "I want you to know," William said as their meeting began to wind down, "that what happened at the service doesn't change anything fundamental about our family relationships. If anything, it reminded me how human we all are underneath the titles and ceremonies." Charles smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. "Your understanding means more to me than you know. I've been worried that I might have created an awkward situation for everyone." "You haven't," William assured him. "We're a family, and families sometimes have awkward moments. The important thing is that we handle them with grace and learn from them." As William prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Catherine asked me to tell you that she's looking forward to working more closely with you on future engagements. She has great respect for your experience and wisdom." After William left, Charles returned to his desk but found it difficult to concentrate on his papers. Instead, he reflected on how the conversation had gone and what it revealed about the strength of their family bonds. Despite the pressures and complexities of royal life, they had managed to address a potentially difficult situation with honesty and mutual respect. That evening, Charles attended a private dinner with Camilla and several close friends. The conversation flowed easily among topics of art, literature, and current events. Charles found himself more relaxed than he had been in days, the weight of worry about the Commonwealth Service incident finally lifting. "You seem in good spirits tonight," Camilla observed as they walked back to their private apartments after the dinner. "I had a wonderful conversation with William today," Charles replied. "He and Catherine continue to amaze me with their maturity and wisdom." Camilla smiled knowingly. "They're remarkable young people, and they clearly care deeply about you and the success of your reign." Over the following weeks, the Commonwealth Service incident gradually faded into the background of royal life. The media coverage had indeed been minimal, focusing primarily on the ceremony's significance rather than any personal moments between family members. Charles began to suspect that his heightened awareness of the situation had made it seem more noticeable than it actually was to outside observers. More importantly, the conversation with William had opened up new channels of communication between them about the challenges and responsibilities they shared. They began meeting more regularly to discuss not just official business, but also the personal aspects of royal life that were often difficult to navigate alone. Catherine, meanwhile, threw herself into expanding her charitable work with characteristic enthusiasm and professionalism. Her increased visibility in royal duties provided valuable support to Charles, while allowing her to pursue causes she was passionate about. The grace she had shown during the Commonwealth Service incident proved to be indicative of her broader approach to royal responsibilities. As spring turned to summer, Charles reflected on how the incident had ultimately strengthened rather than weakened family relationships. It had provided an opportunity for honest conversation about the pressures they all faced and had led to better coordination of their efforts to serve the Commonwealth and the British people. The lesson he took from the experience was that authenticity and human connection were more important than perfect protocol. The moment when he had instinctively reached for support and comfort, even if misdirected, had reminded him that underneath their formal roles, they remained a family bound together by love, respect, and shared commitment to service. In quiet moments, Charles sometimes thought about that instant in Westminster Abbey when time seemed to stand still. Rather than a source of embarrassment, he had come to see it as a reminder of what truly mattered in their lives and work. The strength of their family bonds, their ability to support one another through difficult moments, and their shared dedication to the values and institutions they represented were far more important than any momentary confusion about positioning or protocol. The Commonwealth Service would be remembered for its beautiful music, meaningful prayers, and celebration of international cooperation. For Charles and his family, it would also be remembered as a moment when they proved to themselves and each other that their relationships could withstand the pressures of public life and emerge even stronger than before.